and a lot to continue to consider. And one of the things that we're considering this morning is the not unintended hullabaloo around what is actually going to happen with university funding, with now the obvious collapse of the university funding model and the announcement that the president has made about how the government will undertake 100% payment of this university education. Okay, so many questions around how this is going to happen, but what exactly is happening in universities and its funding is what we have to bring to the fore, and we will have that conversation this morning. Joining us today in the hot seat of the Situation Room to then be able to vanguard this conversation is educationist Dr. Davies Okombo, and he's here with us this morning. Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you so much. I'm fine.
Karibu sana.
Asante.
And thank you for being here today.
Thank you.
Before we get into what might be a little bit of a sticky mess, Dennis has today's proverb.
Now, what is not a sticky mess is the country we are in, which is Malawi, right? And it's a beautiful country because it is home to one of the great lakes in the continent. So talk about Lake Malawi. Mm-hmm. And Lake Malawi, many think of lakes as, if you imagine the shores of Lake Victoria, but then they have white sandy beaches, which is a tourist attraction. And also to enjoy one of the greatest sunsets, you can only enjoy it there because photographers have gone there. So many postcards across the country is the sunset image of Lake Malawi. Yeah. But let's go to the proverb. You cannot plow a field, sow seeds, harvest crops, and eat on the same day. You cannot plow a field, sow seeds, harvest crops, and eat on the same day. How would you interpret it?
Thank you very much indeed, Dennis and Du, for this invitation. It's a pleasure to be back here. Now back to Malawi. To plow and to sow and to seed and to harvest and so on requires a lot of patience. It requires a lot of perseverance. And as the Bible says, you only harvest what you sow or you have planted. In the context of today's discussion, the plowing would require a lot of investment in our public universities in terms of recruitment, in terms of infrastructure, and so on. And as we speak now, our public universities is actually in the life support, and the government is actually plowing in a state where there is no rainfall, and they sow in credit, and you really cannot expect a good outcome of our efforts to advance public university education in this country. Therefore, it is time that the CS for Education must know that we can only reap what we have sown in education sector.
Dive straight into it.
What we are not giving universities is money.
Yeah.
We owe private universities billions, and when they try to follow it up, they are threatened with KRA audits. That's what's happening. The Presidential Working Party on Education Reforms began its work in late 2022 into 2023, went around the country across the different segments of education from primary through towards tertiary. We have a conversation on another day and looking at the challenges through those. But today, what we're having a conversation about is what's happening at the university level. Now, in public universities, what we are understanding is that these fees for the students who go to these universities are subsidized by government. That's what government funding does for a sector. The university funding model said, okay, you have to come and tell us what you're going through or how your situation is, and that will enable us to give you the money to then be able to attend school in form of a grant or a loan or a combination of the two. That seems to have fallen apart. The president now says, okay, we'll fund the whole thing, and I don't know how that's going to happen. And so it leaves people in a bit of a mess in terms of what they will do when they go back to school in September or when they start their courses again in September. What's going on from what you make of it?
Thank you very much indeed. I would first like to begin by acknowledging that what the president said, I think on the 21st of July, was indeed a policy statement which can be in the right direction of providing education for all young Kenyans who qualify to join the universities and the TVET. However, the statement, in my view, was more political than a strategic plan to advance universal university education in Kenya, because facts do not lie. And if you consider the 2026-2027 budget, which in my humble opinion is more of a budget for the 2027 elections that can come with a lot of false promises, a lot of lies to entice the voters and so on. If you look at that budget, many people have said that 28% of the national budget has been allocated to the education sector, and people think that this is really on a higher level. However, a deeper analysis shows that this is merely 3.8% of the GDP compared to the year 2005, when the allocation was at its peak at 7.5% of the GDP. And what is the consequence for this? This clearly shows that education sector in Kenya is heavily underfunded, and therefore to offer universal university education in Kenya, we need a budget of about 133 billion Kenya shillings. And if you look at what...
Just for university?
Yes, that is for the universities and the TVET.
Okay.
Yeah, and looking at the figures, what has been provided, we have a deficit of about 107 billion. And remember, the students are reporting from the, I think, 24th of August.
Yeah.
And you cannot pass laws, you cannot raise these funds within this very, very short time. And therefore, what the president is doing is simply to make a policy statement which, even interestingly, has been contradicted by his own CS for education, because there seems to be lack of policy coherence. On one hand, the president makes a statement and then the CS contradicts him in terms of under which legal framework this policy would be anchored.
Dr.
Yeah.
When we look at funding public universities, it is a budgetary question. It has to be policy. It has to be anchored in law, which the law that we're talking about at this particular point is the Finance Act. Now, the Finance Act, the law became law in June. The president is speaking in July, exactly 1 month later to when that law came to effect. As the president makes all these promises that now we will fund university education, it is backed by what law, by what budgetary allocation? Because it is a policy statement, but it has to be backed by allocations that have been passed by parliament, because that is what authorizes what then goes to universities. One looks at it and says, it is not factual, and perhaps just another political statement that is not meant to be delivered.
I think I would like to state that the 2026-2027 budget has allocation for the old model of university funding for help and so on, and it did not factor the universal university funding, which again raises question on the competence of the CS of education and the education officials at Jogo House, because such a policy statement cannot be addressed by the president merely a month after the budget had passed, as if the left does not know what the right is doing, which is a big mistake. Therefore, as we speak, there is no budgetary allocation for universal university education. However, if you consider what the law provides for in Kenya, it is possible to initiate what we call a supplementary appropriation bill, which, however, is governed by the Constitution, which puts a cap at 10% of the national budget, and also the Public Finance Management Act. But I should state here that the supplementary appropriation bill will also cover, the expenditure that the government may from time to time think of, and usually this bill is proposed once in a year. So there is an opportunity if the government is truly serious to think about having a supplementary budget that may cater for this kind of funding. And I should also say that there have been proposals since the year 2024 to merge the different legal frameworks that govern education in Kenya, like the HELP Act, for instance, and the University Funds Act, and the TVET Act, and so on, into one legal framework called Tertiary Funding and Placement Act, and so on, which I've looked at the website for the National Assembly. It's not yet publicly available. What is available is the 2024 version, which still has under clause 32, the means testing procedures, which really invalidate the universal application that the president is talking about. So when they say that this bill is in parliament, this is really incorrect, and it is lying to the people of Kenya. And when the president on one hand talks about the HELP Act, which is being reviewed, and the CS and I think the spokesman for State House talks about the overview for this new bill. And as we do this, remember, about 293 students, young people with a lot of ambition in Kenya, are waiting to join the university in September. We cannot afford to keep lying to these children. We cannot afford to keep the parents, the hardworking people of this country under suspense. They really don't know what is going to happen. It is high time we have policy coherence, and we don't just make policies in State House where we are so excited and meet people and suddenly talk simply because we are approaching the 2027 elections. I think this is unacceptable, unethical, and unfair to every child and every young person who is joining the university.
If we look at the reasons as to why this funding model collapsed, it's again a resource issue. That only 40% of the eligible number of people to get this funding were receiving the funding. That's well below even half, right? They were not getting this money. And this is one of the reasons that the CS cited as to why that didn't happen. He's also talked, again, to what you alluded to, about a severe gap in terms of the resources that are available. I mean, we can use a lot of academic language to say it, but there's just no money. There's no money to be able to fund this thing. Under a model that was assented to, there was no money. Under this umbrella, where there's now model you've chucked, well, like you said, the budget still allows the model to continue. What that tells us is that under the current budget, that only 40% of university students in the public system will have access to the funds that they need to go to school. That's what we are saying. And this is what confuses us all the more when there is an announcement that it will all be taken care of by government. Will it meet this 28.97 billion shilling funding gap that CS Okombo very clearly said it's needed? So when we look at those things, I see a problem here with the collection and remittance of data. If we are unaware of what it costs to finish a course, 4-year course, for example, a 5-year course at the university or in engineering, a 7-year course in medicine, whatever the case may be, if we are unaware of what it costs, how then can you apply resources to something for which the unit cost you do not know?
It is indeed a tragedy that, as we speak, the CS for Education publicly acknowledged that he and the ministry is not aware of the unit cost of education from kindergarten to the university, which is really a tragedy and an admission of incompetence. In countries like Germany, from the time that a child is born, the public authorities make a clear plan of how this child will be educated, how public health will be financed, even to the point of when this child will die and buried. They make such clear plans. And in Kenya, we have concrete data. We know the number of children that are being born in in our hospitals. We know the number of students in basic education and also in the university. And therefore, to claim that we cannot plan for them is an admission of incompetence, and such people should really leave the office. And now coming back to education funding, the best practice across the world in countries like Germany and Switzerland and so forth, there is always the threshold of how much percentage of the GDP should be allocated for education. And in many of these jurisdictions, it's about 5.4 to 5.8%. Kenya exceeded this threshold in 2005 when it allocated 7.5% of the GDP. And as we speak now, this number has declined to mere 3.4. Now, what does that mean? It means that our universities are faced under funding. The professors cannot be paid well. They are demotivated. And also, if you even look at the broader picture at the basic education level, we also have a lot of capitation deficit and so on. And what the president is trying to do, I can compare it to a builder, a construction worker who is painting, the roof of a house to look so beautiful when the foundation is actually crumbling and is falling apart. It is high time that we address the issue of education capitation in Kenya once and for all. And as I have always said it in this show and several platform, that there is a lot of funds allocated to the CDF, for instance, of which about 20% is meant for education. The president has a bursary scheme. Yes. The governors have it, and you don't know who else has this money. Why can't they bring all this money together into one kitty so that every deserving Kenyan young person can be able to access education? It's time that I call upon Kenyans. We have to demand accountability. We have to secure the future of our children and insist that this government must take responsibility and provide education as contemplated in the law and in the Constitution. And remember, we are moving to elections here, and these are the points voters should demand and ask the presidential candidates what their stand is. And if they cannot guarantee the future of our children, then we know how to vote so that we have a responsible government.
Daktari, you see, we had a presidential working party that was formed by none other than the president. And these individuals went across the country, spent public funds to give us the report on how then funding education across the country would happen, on where senior school would be domiciled. They gave us all that report that then informed decisions that then would be taken by the president. But then again, you find that one of other reasons that have been given why this funding model has not worked is because of means testing. Many students, according to the education stakeholders, are saying lied. And when it came to disbursement of funds, that was not what was on ground. But you've said that Kenya has data on how many children are born in this country, how many children are in kindergarten, are in high school, are in primary school, are in campus, are in TVET. And all these data should inform policy direction and even budgetary allocation. But here then, we have all this data, but when it comes to allocating funds that go to education, we are underfunding, we are under-allocating funds that goes into education. When the president comes to say that finally we will fund, yet the policy that is signed into law, policy that originated from the ministry, came out with underfunding to education sector in the country. Is there any truth to that? Is there political goodwill, honest political goodwill, in dealing and funding education in this country?
Thank you, Dennis. I would first say that we lack political will in ensuring that education is fully funded in spite of the policies and the laws that exist. Now we are talking about review of the laws like the HELP Act and so on, which are really laws that are passed by the Parliament and whose threshold for repeal is very low. But look at Article 53 of the Constitution of Kenya, which provides for the rights of children. Among these rights is the right to free and compulsory basic education, which is entrenched in the Constitution. And even though this provision is clearly provided for in the Constitution, not even an act of Parliament, the government has not honored it, and that is why even basic education is underfunded and are falling apart. Therefore, from where I sit, even if the Tertiary Education and Placement Act is passed and so on, without political will, we are not going to deliver result for every learner in this country. If we cannot respect the Constitution, if we cannot honor what Article 53 provides, what guarantee do we have that the new legal framework will be respected? It is time we find a working a solution, and if the government is unable to fund education, it should clearly come out openly to the people of Kenya and state that, look here, we are not able to do this. Now, if you look at the time of independence in Kenya in the 60s and 70s, the government provided universal university education, and the students would even be given what was then called a boom. They got money and so on, and our GDP at that time was relatively smaller, yet the government could afford this. Then come the 1990s, and the World Bank introduced the sustainable the structural adjustment programs, the SAPs and so on, and cost sharing came into, and so on and so forth. And as a result of this, right now in Kenya, our public universities are actually in life support with the pending bills of about 100 billion Kenya shillings. They cannot even pay statutory deductions for the academic staff, and lecturers are living as people who did not earn PhD. They can't even obtain loans because their credit rating is poor. Now tell me, do you think such a professor will be committed to offering quality education? No, they will go on moonlighting, writing proposals for international agencies, consultants, and so on. And as a result of that, you end up having what we call half-baked, graduates who even have difficulty sometimes to write the application letters. It is time we rescue our public university and make it work, and we tell the CS plainly, it is time to take action. We cannot wait longer.
We want to look at some of those numbers. Davies Okombo is here with us this morning, and we're looking at this university funding issue here with us. And I wanted to tell you some numbers. So every year, you have a move. The exams, of course, are written. 2027 is the last year where this will happen. The 2027 Form 4s were your last grade 8s, right? Class 8s, as it were, at that time. And so the number of students who went into university under government funding in 2023 were 122,634 intake. Now, they didn't graduate in 2024. What does that mean? That they were still covered under government funding in 2024 when another 134,889 students intake. What does that mean? That they, plus the previous year, were still under government funding when the next 180,125 students in 2025 were taken in. We're assuming that there were no students in these public universities before then, and we started university education in 2023. We know that's not the case, but for the purposes of this conversation, let us just pretend. Now, what does that do for us? That in 2026, there are 437,648 students under the specific model of funding, which the CS told us was only hitting 40%. So what does that mean? Of this 437,468, not even 50% of the total number of students who finished and passed through KCSE last year is being covered by this model. Not even 50%. Now, the CS tells us that 40% is where they're able to reach because of lack of resources. Keep that. HELB went to Parliament last month and said, excuse me, we don't have money. We can't do this. The rolling fund is not working. We need an injection of something billion to then be able to have this happen. Because students could then borrow money, and the assumption is that when they finish the university, they get jobs, they pay back, right? Yeah. That is not happening. And all of this, if it confuses you, is without the intake of close to 200,000. This is the people who are going to university in September are the ones who wrote KCSE in December last year. That's the number that we are adding on top of this 438, for which we are only funding to 40%. Are you confused?
Thank you. Thank you very much indeed, Ndu. And as we say, numbers don't lie.
No, they don't.
They tell us the truth. And I would add you a new number. If you combine the number of JSS, that is grade 10 to 12, and the current Form 3 and Form 4, that gives us a total number of 3,479,187 students or learners as the law designates them, and these are learners that are expected to transition to the public universities and the TVET. And according to statistics, already there is a funding gap of 30.4%. That is for the basic education. Now, if you combine that with the gaps that exist in funding for HELB and so on, then indeed we are right to say that our education is in distress, in crisis, and we should see this as a development emergency in Kenya that would actually require policy intervention so that we have conversations and see how we can rescue our education. You know, in development studies and so on, education is actually one of the most important foundation for development in any given country, and a country that does not invest in education would end up producing incompetent, unproductive and demotivated people, and as you see in Kenya today, we have a problem with goonism and so on. This is when people will end up becoming goons because they're not able to, access education. Now, that means that we have the data. We know what is required. We know the number of students. The education ministry should come out clearly. And I would like to challenge the members of parliament. Why can't they censure the education officials if they cannot really talk about these issues? When allocations are being done, I believe that Parliament has a lot of authority. They are our representatives. Why do Parliament, pass bills and so on, and then the Treasury finally makes a decision on what they can allocate or not? No, we cannot grow this country in such a manner. And I would challenge the policy makers, please help the children of Kenya. We have a country where the top leadership don't take their children to public schools, to public universities, and therefore they really do not understand what is going on. And that brings me even into the question of institutional autonomy of our universities. Are they able to make independent decisions, or are they merely working because the CS for Education has appointed them? It is time that we can work towards transforming the education sector in this country.
Dr. When we talk about funding education, we equally can't run away from the existing debt. The debt that is owed, and universities all wholesomely range to around 100 billion shillings or thereabout, 90 to 100 billion shillings. And even when the president today says we will fund education, this money goes in there, and the first thing universities will think about is how do we sustain, because suppliers have not been paid, and these universities depend on suppliers for them to be able to run on a daily basis. That would mean they have to pay their debt. So there is the debt question that still exists, and that even when we say we want to fund, there is no way universities will be able to do their job without addressing the already existing debt. Because even as we speak at the moment, the entire funding of education sector, still we are operating at a deficit of around 260 billion shillings. So with pronouncements that we see, we are not seeing any address or any communication towards how we are going to pay debt, how the government will meet its end of the bargain. Is there honesty when we say we will fund education but not address the question of debt?
Thank you. I agree with you that the amount of debt that our universities owe is in high numbers of about 100 billion Kenya shillings that is owed to the suppliers and pension schemes for the academic staff, the statutory deductions and so on, which have a direct consequence on the academic staff. And as I've mentioned before, they are not able to access public health services because SHA is not remitted. They are not able to pay up their loans, and as a result of that, they are considered as defaulters and blacklisted. Some of these esteemed professors will die without ever accessing their pensions. And such people lack motivation, and that is why, as we speak, a lot of professors are leaving this country. In the past, we had professors like Professor Ali Mazrui. We had people like Professor, who is the current governor of Kisumu, Professor Nyong'o, and the like. People like Professor Ngugi wa Thiong'o. They went to exile because of the political oppression of that time, not economic reasons. But right now, professors are leaving this country because their terms of services are very, very poor. For a professor to survive on what we call Fuleza and Mshwari loans from M-Pesa, it's terrible, Dennis. It's really terrible if a professor can go to Mama Mboga and borrow sukuma wiki of 50 shillings to feed their family. Do you think this professor will really invest in research? The answer is no. Therefore, the debt crisis in our public universities put our universities in, life support. There can never be research. There can never be infrastructural development, and so on. And in addition to that, the funding gap in higher education funding is about 223 billion shillings. And all this is not factored in the 2026-2027 budget. Now, this is simply, putting our public universities on a path of disintegration, on a path where they would not be able to compete the rest of the universities across the world. And you remember the University of Nairobi, for example, was one of the very, very competitive universities in East Africa, close just to Makerere University in Uganda and so forth. And right now, when the best quality professors are struggling, we will end up having people with questionable academic papers in the lecture halls, and you can imagine what that would result to in terms of the quality of education that we offer. Yep.
Underfunding and poor funding, rather, of education sector in the country, university education. What does that do to quality of education? What does that do to quality of graduates that we see? Because if you look at university as the highest point of education in any country is supposed to offer solutions. Research and development should happen in these institutions, But if we are not paying lecturers, if we are not able to sustain students in school, what does that mean to the quality of education, to the quality of individuals graduating? And how does that affect the overall performance of a country, economic-wise and even social-wise? Because we're just not funding education. We're not taking it seriously.
No, underfunding of education really undermines the quality of the graduates that we have. And this is because there are courses that need specialized laboratories. And remember, STEM is one of the pathways for CBE that would require, properly equipped laboratories. We need properly stocked libraries. We need the IT equipment and so on and so forth. And when there is poor funding, the consequence is that the universities would not be able to enhance their infrastructure, and that means we will have outdated IT devices. We will have even the medical schools would struggle to train medical doctors when these facilities are lacking. And this is the reason students now go back to what we used to call in the university Mwakenya. Mwakenya was a way of passing examinations when everything else is not working. Then you look for Mwakenya because you have no resources. When it comes to research and innovation, do you know that no student in Kenya, for instance, can apply to University of Nairobi for research grants? You have to go to other state agencies. The research funds go to NACOSTI and those others. And a lot of research in our public universities are financed by development agencies. And when they pull out, everything stops. So we have over 20 universities that lack independence in terms of research and innovation. And as a consequence of this, the quality of the training is compromised. We are not able to engage and retain the best of the academic staff. And that is why come 2027, you'll see a lot of professors leaving the university to go into the dirty field of politics. They want to become MCAs and MPs and so on. You remember even at the time of President Kibaki and so on, we had even a very famous university professor contesting for presidency because you find no value in the university. You spend years studying for your PhD, masters and so on, writing a lot of academic articles and so on. And this is not really appreciated in a country. Finally, look at what happens during, I don't know, you call it, this day when Kenyans are honored, they are called Kenyans who work hard. Mashujaa Day. You look at that list and tell me whether you'll see a professor who invented something or contributed to academic knowledge. You'll only hear about last time there was a Githeri man, for example. You'll hear of people who are doing very, very funny things. No, it is time you recognize the academic community. We are important. We want to develop this country, and this must be taken as a point of significance in this country. Yeah.
So maybe a devil's advocate angle, or one that may not be so palatable. If it's obvious, it's obvious, just look at these numbers from 2023, 2024, 2025, that there is an inability, forget about goodwill, there is an inability to fund in the way in which it would be desired. So why is there the insistence on government funding at a higher education level? Is it not about time that you say, you know what? We cannot do this. We don't have the resources. The resources are not even spread thin. Sometimes you're thin layer. The thin layer is not there. So is it not time to say, you know what? Let us look at this thing, because we know that state universities are just that. They're state universities. That means they're partly owned. They're parastatals. There are some which are actually standing as parastatals today.
Yeah.
So they receive some element of funding, but it is clear that you cannot across board. And it's about time that if you're going to say follow the model of some universities in other parts of the world, whereby you have own source revenue, you are mastering in literature research, and that you're making sure that you essentially, quote unquote, sell your expertise for funding. Is it about time that we said, well, don't depend on the state because this donkey is too heavily laden?
I think I would categorically state that it is possible to consider education capitation in Kenya and make it work if our budgeting process can be inclusive, and if the members of parliament can listen to the voices of people. I believe we can find a way of funding not only university education but also basic education in Kenya. As to your question on whether the universities need to be very innovative and raise funds and so on, this is significantly undermined by the lack of institutional autonomy in our public universities, in which case the councils are appointed by the CS for education. And imagine a council that is supposed even to interview the vice chancellors and so on, a CS for education who may not necessarily have a PhD. You have to question people with masters and a PhD in an area where you have not qualified. It becomes really difficult. And at the moment now, they made a change in 2018 to the Universities Act, which now gives the Public Service Commission the power to lead the process of recruitment of the vice chancellors, which further undermine their independence and autonomy. If we can borrow from countries like Germany, which is one of the leading countries in matters of education, the universities are led by a person called rector, and rector is elected by the academic staff. So these are peers. The professors sit together and they elect one of their own who understands what they go through, who understands the basic issues in education, and they sit together. Unlike Kenya, where most of these appointments are merely political, and as a result, sometimes we have incompetent people who sit in these positions, and as a result of that, it is not possible for them to secure external funding to make sure that education can be funded and that their programs can run and so on and so forth. Therefore, for your proposal to work, it is important to enhance institutional autonomy of all our public universities so that they can be able run effectively and deliver quality education for all Kenyans.
But Terry, politics, education, one would say they're connected in one way or the other, because it is politics that then would inform policy, But at what point then should the political class delink themselves from matters education to allow education to work? Because what we've seen over time is that too much politics continues to affect the quality of education that we give to the students of this country. That the country is not gaining the very best there is to offer because of too much politicking. Well, whilst we agree that education matters in one way or the other is political, but at what point then should we delink politics from education?
I have to state that politics and higher education, especially university education, should be completely delinked. And I would give you the example of one of the most prestigious university in the world, and that is the Harvard University in the United States, where people where we have many lawyers in Kenya who have ever been there. And if you've been to Harvard, then you are highly respected. In 2025, there was a crisis between President Trump and the management of Harvard University, and Trump actually threatened to freeze any further funding to Harvard University, and of course this was overturned by the independent courts in the United States, and that clearly showed how politics can undermine university education. And also there was a time, at the peak when there was a conflict between Israel and of course Palestine and so on. There are many student activists, for instance, in the University of California and so on, in which states began to undermine their independence, and a lot of students had their visas revoked because they spoke against the atrocities that Israel was committing and so on. And that really shows the extent of government's interference, even in developed countries like the United States. In Kenya, of course, you remember the University of Nairobi, where the council appointed a professor to be the vice chancellor, and then there were a lot of issues, to the point that for 2 years there was no substantive vice chancellor at the University of Nairobi. And this is because the CS has the powers actually to manage all this and so on. And therefore, to that extent, I would wish to state that the councils of the universities deserve independence to make decisions, to recruit staff without the interference of the ministry and the politicians. I would also cite the Moi University in Eldoret. There was a time that a very good professor, who I know so well, was the vice chancellor there, and then some members of parliament who even never stepped into university went there and said, "Hey, look, you're not supposed to be here. We need our own. We need our own to sit here and manage staff." So they evicted this distinguished professor. And the result? One of the private universities here in Nairobi recruited him. It's one of the most prestigious university. It trains a lot of journalists like you. And they went there, and miracles are now happening in this university. So all this political interference are not necessary. Let the experts, let the experts run the universities, and politicians do their own politics the way they do it.
It sounds as though there's a lot of work that needs to be done. And there's a lot of consideration that needs to come into play here. That are there enough resources to fund education, as some countries do, whereby tertiary education is free? And free meaning that it is paid by government with the resources that are budgeted for and then available. Necessary to have those conversations, and that we won't tire from having them, because it must be done. That there are those who are in the waiting, that there are those who are coming up. December is knocking around the corner, and come September next year, you're going to add another, 200,000 students are being added this September. That number will increase next year. So there's a lot to be considered, and thank you for at least being here with us to have this conversation this morning, because it's opened our eyes to a number of things, and that we must continue to engage on this level. Davies Okombo, educationist, has been with us